Good. Vidvat Pravara Rama Subramanya Mahashayaha, ladies and gentlemen. Unlike the writers of other branches of Sanskrit learning, about whom we know nothing but their names, authors of works on Jyotish Shastra from Aryabhata onwards generally mention the years of their birth or epochs that are closer to their own times. Bhaskara mentions that he was born in 1114 and that he composed the Siddhanta Shiromani in 1150. He also mentions the name of his place of residence. More important, he is the only astronomer for the propagation of whose works a matha was established by his grandson Changadeva. The inscription of 1207, which records the establishment of the matha, contains a detailed genealogy of Bhaskara going back to several generations. Thus, Bhaskara is not a mythical figure like Kalidasa, but a historical personage whose date, provenance, and authorship are firmly established. Even so, legends grew up about him and are perpetuated. The most persistent legend is that Bhaskara composed the Lilavati to console his widowed or unmarried daughter named Lilavati. This legend occurs for the first time in the Persian translation of the Lilavati by Akbar's poet laureate Abul Fazl Faizi in 1587, who narrates as follows. Lilavati was the name of his daughter. From the indication of the horoscope of her birth, it appeared that she would be childless and spend her life without a husband. Her father, after much meditation, chose a particular moment for the marriage that would be of a firm foundation of union and would enable the daughter to have offspring. When this moment appeared, he had the daughter and the groom brought together and set up a water clock to determine the correct moment. Since what was proposed was not in accordance with what was fated, it chanced that the girl, out of curiosity, went on looking at the bowl of water clock, and enjoyed the sight of water coming in through the hole below. Suddenly, a single pearl got detached from the bride's clothes and fell in the bowl and stopped the inflow of water. Thus, the moment they had been looking for had passed. Finally, the luckless father told the ill-starred daughter, "I shall write a book titled after your name, which will long endure in the world, for a good name is like a second life for one and confers immortal life upon the seed." Thus narrates Faizi. From this time onwards, this legend spread far and wide and is accepted today as historical fact. From the outset, it is obvious that naming a book after an unmarried or widowed daughter violates the social mores of the period. Faizi narrates that Bhaskara's daughter Lilavati remained unmarried. He would not have known that keeping a daughter unmarried was considered a grave sin in the Dharma Shastra. The Yajnavalkya Smriti declares that a father who does not give away his daughter in marriage commits the sin of killing the embryo each time she has her monthly course. Aprayachan samapnoti prunahatyam rutau, said Yajnavalkya. As a scrupulous follower of tradition, Bhaskara would not have gone against the injunctions of the Dharma Shastra. On the other hand, according to the popular version now current in India, Lilavati was married, but the husband died soon after, and Lilavati became widow. To console her, Bhaskara named the book after her. This version too goes against the traditional value system in India, which considers the widow as an inauspicious person and even prohibits her presence at auspicious occasions like marriages. Bhaskara certainly would not have named his book after a widowed daughter, howsoever dear she might have been to him. The internal evidence in the book called Lilavati also shows the improbability of the legend. It is often asserted that the book was written for the daughter Lilavati because the word occurs in the first and last verse of the book, and because some examples, udaharanas, are directly addressed to her by name. Before examining these cases, it is necessary to understand Bhaskara's aim in writing his works and the style which he adopts for this purpose. In each of his books, he repeatedly states that his aim is to make the book lucid so that it is easily comprehensible to the beginners, Bala Leela Avagamya, but at the same time, the work should have enough new material, new methods of presentation, new turns of expression, and rationales, Sopapatti Prakara, which would earn the appreciation of experts. Chatura Priti Prada, Vidagtha Ganaka Priti Pada, Sumati Prajna Samullasaka, and so on are some of the expressions he uses in this connection. Moreover, Bhaskara is not just an eminent mathematician and astronomer, but as Dr. Ramasubramaniam showed this morning, he is also an accomplished poet. In fact, he often refers to him as Kavi Bhaskara. As Kavi, he infuses his work with poetic flavor through Leela and Lalitya. Leela denotes, on the other one hand, play, amusement, pastime, child's play, ease of facility in doing anything, and on the other, grace, charm, beauty, elegance, loveliness, etc. In short, anything that can be performed with ease and cheerfulness. And Lalitya means elegance. This should be kept in mind when reading the first verse of the Lilavati, which you already heard this morning. After worshipping Ganesha in the first half, Bhaskara continues the second half as follows. Pritim sadganitasya vachmi chatura priti pradam prasputam sanchiptatshara komalamala padair lalitya Liilavatim. I shall expound the book of algorithms of good mathematics, Sadganitasya Patim, in words concise, soft, and faultless, Sanchiptatshara Komala Malapadair, the book which would delight the experts, Chatura Priti Prada, which is clear and unambiguous, Prasputa, and which is endowed with playful elegance, Lalitya Lilavati. The last expression, Lalitya Lilavati, at the end of the verse does not refer to Bhaskara's daughter Lilavati, but to Pati, the subject of the book. Therefore, Lalitya Lilavati implies that the book is elegant and easy and pleasurable to read. In fact, no commentator saw here a reference to a daughter called Lilavati. And Bhaskara employs the expression Lalitya Lilavati also in the invocation at the beginning of the Goladhyaya and explains Lalitya Lilavati means Madhurya Guna Sampanna in the Vasana Bhashya. Lilavati as the addressee. In two verses, the Udaharanas are addressed to a person described as Lilavati. Verse 13 begins with the words, O young and intelligent Lilavati, Aye Bale Lilavati Mati Mati. If you are good in addition and subtraction, tell the sum of certain numbers and the difference between two other numbers. Verse 17 addresses somebody as young Lilavati, whose eyes are tremulous like those of a young deer. Bale, Bala Kurangalola Nayane Lilavati, and poses a simple problem of multiplication. There is no doubt that in these verses the author appears to be addressing a young lady, young female person as Lilavati. It may be her name or an attribute meaning that the person is a charming woman. If Bhaskara wrote the book for his daughter Lilavati, all the Udaharanas in this book must be addressed to her. But only 7 Udaharanas have feminine addressees, whereas as many as 58 Udaharanas have masculine addressees. Even some of the feminine addresses are inappropriate for a daughter. Of these, you heard this morning, Kalyanini, would be highly inappropriate for a girl whose kalyana did not take place or ended in widowhood. On the address Kante is better suited for a beloved and not for a daughter. The last verse provides the clinching evidence against the hypothesis of a daughter named Lilavati. It is a verse with teasing layers of double meaning. So I write both the meanings one below the other. One is a reflection, mirror image of the other, or one is the udaharana, and one is the upameya, and another is the upamana, as they say. So, yesham sujati guna varga vibhushitangi shuddhakhila vyavahriti khalu kanthasakta lilavatiha sarasokti mudaharanti tesham sadaiva sukhasampat upaiti vruddhim. Those who memorize Kanthasakta is the same as Kanthastha, the book Lilavati, whose sections, Anga, are adorned with excellent rules for the reduction of fractions to a common denominator, Sujati, multiplication Guna, squaring Varga, etc., having entirely accurate fundamental procedures, Shuddha Akhila Vyavahriti in the same sense, Vyavahara, illustrating Udaharanti, the rules will elegant examples, Sarasa Ukti, their happiness, Sukha, and wealth, Sampat, increase forever and ever in the world. And it happens in the same manner as those whose neck is clasped, Kanthasakta, that is embraced, by a charming woman, Lilavati, whose limbs, Anga, are adorned with a multitude of good qualities, Guna Varga, indicating her good birth, Sujati, perfect in all her acts of behavior, Shuddha Akhila Vyavahriti, whispering passionate words, Sarasoktim Udaharanti, the intensity of their erotic pleasure, Sukha Sampat, increases forever and ever. Surely, Bhaskara would not have composed this verse with such an erotic undertone about his own daughter. No commentator sees here a reference to his daughter. They see here two levels of meaning, one pertaining to the book and another pertaining to a graceful woman. Thus, Bhaskara's own work contains no reference to a daughter called Lilavati, nor do any of the commentaries mention a woman or a daughter called Lilavati. Then how did the story of Lilavati appear in Faizi's Persian translation of the Lilavati? Akbar desired that the Muslim intelligentsia, we'll go back to that picture once more. Yes. Desired that the Muslim intelligentsia be made familiar with the classics of Hindu thought so that they have a better interaction with the Hindus. He therefore established a bureau of translation where some of the Sanskrit texts were rendered into Persian. In this bureau, translation was not performed by a single scholar proficient in both Sanskrit and Persian, but by teams of scholars, some proficient in Sanskrit, others in Persian. They did the work in 3 stages. First, Hindu or Jain scholars prepared a paraphrase in a contemporary Hindi of the Sanskrit text to be translated. In the second stage, this Hindi paraphrase was translated into Persian by one of the several Muslim courtiers. Finally, the Persian translation was polished and put into elegant prose and verse by one of the more accomplished scholars. What resulted in this process cannot be termed an exact translation, but rather a Persian paraphrase. Bhaskaracharya's Lilavati was also rendered in the same manner into Persian by Faizi, with the help of Sanskrit scholars from Deccan, as he himself mentions. John Taylor says that the Persian version has many omissions, and departs in some passages so far from the original as to, I quote, induce the suspicion that Faizi contented himself with writing down the verbal explanation afforded by his assistant. Faizi apparently was intrigued by the book of dry mathematics, was given the name Lilavati, a name which is given to the girls. 5 centuries prior to him, similar doubts arose to the great Al-Biruni about the name of Brahmagupta's Khanda Khadyaka, which literally means a preparation made with candied sugar, khand. His Sanskrit Pandit told him a funny but improbable story, which Al-Biruni believed and faithfully recorded in his book on India. Like Al-Biruni, Faizi also must have demanded from his informant, Lilavati is a girl's name. Why did Bhaskara Acharya give this book such a name? Isn't it rather absurd? Instead of explaining that giving such names is not uncommon in Sanskrit tradition, the informant narrated him a story about Bhaskara's daughter missing the exact time of her marriage because the aperture in the water clock got blocked. Faizi's informant did not invent the story entirely, but adapted a story that was current at this time in the popular didactic literature of the Jainas. In this story, a Brahmin named Vidya saw that his daughter's horoscope indicated her husband's death in the 6th month after the marriage. After consulting many books, he found a very auspicious moment, Lagna. If a girl is married at that moment, she will never become a widow. He decided to marry his daughter to the son of a rich Brahmin at that moment and set up a water clock to indicate the moment and so on. Now, this story, I won't go into it. And so that is how the story got into from the Jaina source into Persian. Now, the Faizi's legend of Lilavati lay dormant for next 200 and odd years until the officers of the East India Company stumbled upon it. Edward Strachey, who read the Persian translation of both Lilavati and Bijaganita, communicated a summary of the Lilavati legend to Charles Hutton, who published it in 1812 in the second volume of his tracts on mathematical and philosophical subjects. Since that time, the legend followed its own trajectory and was repeated innumerable times in various histories of mathematics, sometimes with further elaborations. The last word. Now, the well-known company Infosys of Bangalore has instituted the Lilavati Prize of 1 million rupees for the popularization of mathematics, to be awarded by the ICM, the International Conference of Mathematics. The first recipient in 2011 was a British author, Mr. Simon Lena Singh, and the second in 2014 is Mr. Adrian Paenza from Argentina. Thank you very much. Oh, I had more time. Good, I didn't notice. Yes. Yes.
Are there any other texts of Shastras in Sanskrit where examples or addresses are made to women this way?
Yes. Udaya Divakara wrote something where addressed to Sundari, and Professor Hayashi mentioned a few cases where also there is one Chanda Shastra which is addressed to a woman. Yeah, that's not. And then, of course, giving a name to a feminine name is very common, Bhamati, Kashika, and so on. Taylor, while mentioning this story, he said he has inquired in India and nobody has heard of this story. Yeah, John Taylor. Yeah. And Faizi, when he wrote, he said, it is said.
He wasn't giving it any definitive sense.
No, he did not give any definitive sense. I propose actually to append the exact translation of Faizi's story into this paper eventually. Mm-hmm.
So, in reference to the Jaina
Mm.
where the personages are entirely different.
Yeah, the story is the same. Story.
It doesn't relate to Bhaskara.
It doesn't relate to Bhaskara.
The question is whether in popular perception, somehow the story was also considered. In other words, was it still an invention based on others kind of?
No, Jainas have a theory that mere book knowledge is not enough, spiritual perception is necessary. They have their own story of Varahamihira. Varahamihira is supposed to be brother of a Jaina saint, according to the Jaina version. And Varahamihira himself had a son, and he calculated that the son would have such a long life, but the brother said, no, he won't live such long. And then again, at a very early stage, the son died. And the story being, even Varahamihira cannot predict exactly. He has only book knowledge and not spiritual knowledge. And so this story also says that nobody, fate's writing cannot be altered. Vidhina likitam anyatha nasyat. That is the moral of this Jaina story. So our man, Faizi's informant, while narrating the story to Faizi, instead inserted the names of Bhaskaracharya and Lilavati. But in the original Jaina story, Vidyananda marries off the daughter even though the prescribed time had passed, knowing fully well that his dear daughter would soon become a widow. Faizi may have thought that it would be too cruel and so made Lilavati remain unmarried, unaware that for a Brahmin not to marry off the daughter would be a greater sin than having a widowed daughter. That's a bit cultural differentiation.
Yeah. So,
slightly maybe unrelated. But, it is said Bhaskara, some astrological work of Bhaskara is cited, some Bhaskara, Vyavahara, something like that. What is your...
I don't know. I mean, it's possible that Bhaskara wrote an astrological work. The distinction which we came to make recently between astrology and astronomy does not occur. This morning I mentioned the great commentators, Ganesha Daivagnya, Nrsimha Daivagnya, Krishna Daivagnya, who all wrote excellent commentaries on mathematical astronomical texts. They kept the title Daivagnya, who knows the fate, who knows the unknown. So Daivagnya in general literally meant an astrologer, but they kept such names. Maybe Bhaskara wrote, but we don't know. It hasn't come down to us.
R Sarma, yeah, next. Yeah, you first.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for that talk. I'll just speak loud.
Hello.
Can I ask the more general question, which seems not often to be asked, about what naming a mathematical work by a female name reveals more about the status of women and their access to education, and in particular mathematics at the time?
No. My conclusion, this story neither proves Bhaskaracharya's great mastery of predictive astrology, nor does it prove women's achievements in mathematics in ancient India. It merely distracts us from the more important scientific achievements of Bhaskaracharya. We don't know about women's education, how it was.
Maybe this suggests, though, that there was a certain esteem, right? You wouldn't call the name of a work after a woman if it was to denigrate the work.
No, I mean, it's not after a woman. It's Lilavati is a book that has, Leela, it's a charming book, that's all. So, a grammatical book, Kashika, can mean woman of Kashi, of course, but it has nothing to do with that. It's belonging to Kashi. Bhamati, there is another great philosophical book, having great bha, luster, but again, it has nothing to do with a woman. In a way, one could say that every poet treats his work as a woman, as his daughter or whatever. Or as a
legend on Bhamati also, right?
Yeah, there is a legend on Bhamati too.
I want to have a clarification of the term party in the 19th Sept party. Does this refer to a branch of the...
He said this morning, party comes from paripati, method, methodology, algorithm.
Is that the subject?
Sorry?
Some branch of mathematics that party.
It's a branch of mathematics, and I think some of these people, Ganesha Daivagnya explained what all is contained in math party, and he just said what is contained in Lilavati.
Yeah. Thank you, sir.
Yeah. Vyakta Ganita as against Avyakta Ganita.
So according to you, Bhaskaracharya addressed all through these many shlokas?
Imaginary people. Quite often for reasons of meter. You needed a long syllable, another long syllable, ballet, okay? And you needed 4 short syllables, mati mati.
So feminine as well as...
Yeah. And you will have a paper that each of these addresses have a graded meaning and so on and so forth.
Ask Professor Clemency's question in a different way. If knowledge of mathematics was banished for women, would such a way of writing a textbook be acceptable in society?
Yeah. I don't know what kind of knowledge people had. You see, we are talking about this Sanskrit mathematical texts were used for a limited circle of people, but beyond that there are many practitioners of mathematics. For example, merchants. The merchants would do exchange, barter, and money lending and so on. They won't read Lilavati, but they would have some kind of learning from their fathers and so on, about which we have absolutely no idea. The only thing which we know is about 19th century, from which we can interpolate. The Gazetteer of Bombay Presidency in 19th century says the Bania boys learn 40 types of multiplication tables, 1 to 40. They learn also squares. They learn interest rates, tables of interest rates, and so on and so forth. So there would be several there. And then, of course, there are always the ladies who would be selling objects from farms and so on. And how do they calculate? They will also be numerate. That's what I have been telling. When we have this from the Vedas itself, you have numerical numbers, and they were playing with it. And again, this example which Professor Kusuba spoke about, how many variations there are in Vishnu's hands. If these are interchanged, there would be 24. And then the funny thing is, in Smarta Sankalpa, every morning you say Keshavaya Swaha, Madhavaya Swaha, and so on. You mention 24 names. And then there are also some Chaturvidha Murti statues are found, few of them. Dr. Kalpana Desai is supposed to have written a book, and there must be a modern temple in Bombay with these Chaturvidha Murtis. Now, there is no ritual, no religious reason to have 24. This is purely some mathematician's fun that he said, if you exchange these Gada, Chakra, and so on, then there would be 24, and then he created mathematical variations of Vishnu. And that became standardized in the sense of we have Sankalpa of Keshava and so on and so forth. So, I mean, we could call it mathematics in religion. It also plays. It's only very recently that people lost this ability. I think nowadays, I don't know if people can multiply mentally. All Europeans who came to India talked about Indians' ability to mentally calculate and so on. But that we lost suddenly with pocket calculators. And I go to shops, the fellow does with the hand and with the pocket calculator, and he's wrong both times.
Nowadays mobiles.
Okay, nowadays mobiles, it seems. So, I mean, somehow at some stage we lost this ability. But mathematical knowledge, not necessarily in the form of Sanskrit texts, must have available at a various strata of society and also different genders. In my village, in my childhood, all the ladies who came to sell various kinds of vegetables, they could count, all right. I mean, maybe a bit rough, but still they did count.
Shall I add something?
Please.
Near Hampi, there is one Pattadakal, I think. There is one statue. There is one statue having Shiva statue, 9 hands each side, and the mudras, one can make all the 81 mudras with those 9 hands and the variations are there.
Are they either 81 statues?
No.
No.
Statue.
Yeah. That's what I'm saying. In this in Bhaskara's example of Shiva with 10 hands with various emblems interchanged, that's only hypothetical. But whereas the question of Vishnu having 4 hands and these interchange, these are really existing ritual figures which you can see in sculpture.
Yeah, last one.
Good evening, sir. If we consider perspection that all the poets consider their work as their daughter or someone they like an affectionate look at them towards someone like daughter, it would make sense because the way you said about 2 phrases in which Bhaskara900 mentions the word Lilavati, in which in the beginning he mentions her as a Bala, and over after a certain time of growth, like where it has matured enough, he refers to the Lilavati as a young lady. So could that mean by any sense?
Well, you can have lots of imagination and read lots of stories into it. Bale at one stage where she is just adding, a little bit later she has to do multiplication and so on. But as I said, these are all imaginary things. He's addressing imaginary people. Yeah. Yeah.
What about the story of those construction of various Vyanjans?
Various?
Vyanjan.
Which story?
In Bhaskara900, take chili and salt and make all the various.
No, but that I think is different. So I think we should stop here.
No, my point is that how did it come?
So there are various examples he gives for various things.
Yeah.
Okay, so we
Thank you very much.
for a very interesting presentation on the story of Vidya.